My occupational skill is 94B, food service specialist, and my alternate MOS is 11 Bravo, infantryman. We are known as combat cooks. When the war breaks out and our unit is deployed, we go along with them. The military runs on its stomachs, so we are the backbone of the military that keeps the troops moving. When it's time to eat, we feed them and they go right back out into the field. We are prepared to fight alongside other infantrymen when need be. My name is Wayne Dickson. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I was born in Itazuki Air Force Base in 1962 in Kyushu, Japan. My father was U.S. Air Force, and he was stationed in Japan shortly after World War II. And he worked in munitions and weapons for the B-29 and B-52s. When I was 17 years old, I was still in high school. I was getting ready to graduate. And my father came up to me and he said, "Son, what do you want to do for the rest of your life?" I said, "Well, I was thinking about, taking a couple courses in criminal justice and thinking about becoming a Sacramento police officer." He goes, "Well, that's great, but have you ever thought about joining the military?" And I said, "Well, you know what? I thought about it. It has occurred to me, and but I'm just not interested in war." And he said, "Well, let me give you a scenario." He says, "If you had a home and you had a family, and somebody tried to invade your home, would you defend it?" I said, "Of course I would." He says, "When you're in your home and you're defending yourself and your family, you're only one person. Where in the military, you have a whole force behind you. Think of the United States as your home. And think about the military as the force that you have joined to protect your home from enemies that are trying to attack it." So I thought about it and I said, "Well, you know what? That's a very good scenario." So I thought about it and I ended up joining the Army. I went to a basic training for about 10 weeks, and then we had to go to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for my AIT, where I had to learn my occupations, which was 94B, food service specialist. This is where I learned how to cook in a dining facility. I did 10 weeks of that, and then I ended up going to Fort Lewis, Washington, where I was attached to the 2nd Battalion, 60th Infantry, 9th Infantry Division. After spending a year in Fort Lewis, I ended up getting orders to go to Korea. Yongsan Army Base is the largest strategic army base in Seoul, Korea. When I first found out, I was pretty nervous about it because of my Japanese origin. I was born in Kyushu, Japan, like I said, and my mother was Japanese, and she warned me that Koreans will probably look at you, as a enemy because for the fact that, you are half Japanese and American. It started back in 1910 when Japan occupied Korea. They made them slaves. They took over their country, and they did not release Korea back to their country, as their own until 1945. And Koreans hated the Japanese ever since. I didn't know what to expect. I thought that this was peacetime. Everything will be fine. You only have 1 year left. Go to this country, do your time, and come back to the United States. I thought that I could get some sort of a peace over there and learn about different cultures, but I was wrong. In 1987, Korea was under a very violent protest.
This is Yonsei University, but it isn't a scene unique to this campus. Trouble has been erupting throughout South Korea's universities. Police have been clashing regularly with students in a recent wave of violent anti-government protests. Much of the student anger against the government of Chun Doo-hwan stems from the president's decision about his successor.
Students were opposing a dictator president that was in power at the time. He was about to go against Wo Tae-woo, who is the new president. A lot of the students did not want their democracy being taken into communism. So they started rioting out in the streets with the police. We talk about millions of people, on the streets of Seoul. They were all armed with Molotov cocktails, chains, bats, sticks. They were tipping buses over and trying to tip cars over. I mean, it was just fire all over the place. And there were loudspeakers that were going on 24 hours a day, and all you can hear was Korean propaganda talking bad about how bad the United States were, how bad the Americans were, and how corrupt the Americans were. Some of the Molotov cocktails were being thrown over the walls of the compound at Yongsan, and which resulted in us going on alert and shutting down the gates. This protest has been going on for several months, all the way till October of 1987. Korea is kind of like a country where it's not really recognized very much. About all the troops that are stationed there. And you notice my hat here, it says Korean Defense Veteran. I do get a lot of questions. Korean veterans, they believe that, that I was in the Korean War, which I wasn't. That's the reason why it says Korean Defense. And this was established in 2003 when President George Bush wanted to recognize all the U.S. troops that are stationed in the Korean Peninsula that is protecting, from a possible invasion of the North. So I get back home from Korea, and I re-enlisted with the 308th Ambulance Service, and where I continued to be a food service specialist. I did 1 year for that, and then I was attached to the 921st Field Hospital, where I continued on as a food service specialist. Then I went to another unit, which was the 319th Signal Battalion, where I finished up my reserve time. So a total of 13 years that I was in the United States Army, active duty and reserves, and I got out in 1997. If I could do it all over again, I would, in a heartbeat. I miss the discipline. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the friends that you meet, from all walks of life, and in the military, we know no colors, we're all green.
Marianas, 1,500 miles northward over the Pacific, flies this great armada on what has become almost a daily mission.
My mother was 13 years old when she heard B-29s coming toward her area. The air raid sirens were going off, and she was told to grab her belongings and run for the hills. And she did that. You know, her home was on fire. Her friend's home was on fire. And these were fire bombings, you know, that the United States Air Force was doing. In this fire bombing, approximately 30,000 to 80,000 people were actually incinerated and died. My mother hid out throughout the nights, you know, with no food, no water. I don't know how she made it. In 1952, my father, you know, he was a United States Air Force turret gunner. He also was, you know, in ammunitions, and he was a bomb loader and specialized in weapons for the B-29 bomber. He ended up meeting my mother and dated her, and ended up wanting to get married. And in 1954, he decided to meet with her father, and he actually ended up wearing his uniform with the B-29 patch. And again, you know, that triggered her father off, because for the fact that it was just not too long that the war happened. And even though that my father was not a part of this war, because he told him that he was 13 years old as well, he was not very popular with her father. He basically told him, you know, you come to my country and you try to kill my daughter, and you destroyed our house, and now you want to marry her. And even though that he says I was not a part of that war, you know, it was a trigger, you know, for him, and it took him a while for him to think about.
The bomb was finally released exactly at the designated hour, and the explosion occurred as planned.
When I see this video, it's a lot of pain, devastation, you know, just knowing that my mother had nothing to do with what happened in Pearl Harbor, to annihilate 30 to 80,000 people that had nothing to do with military operations. You know, at Pearl Harbor, you know, they all had to pay the price. You know, I don't know how she escaped this type of devastation, you know, but I'm very humbled, you know, that she escaped, you know, because if she didn't, I wouldn't be sitting here